Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Drumversations. It is dubiously Friday the 13th. Dun, dun, dun. But it is also National Kindness Day. And unfortunately, the United States has 10.6 million cases of COVID. So that's the context in which we are having today's conversation. And before we get into everything that actually is related to the COVID cases in a way, we have to do what we need to do to center ourselves and to create synchronicity, and that is breathe. So breathe in, breathe out, breathe in and out. Breathe in all the love and goodness of the universe. And out all the crazy and anxiety, all the wonderful things the universe has for all of us, and all of the fear and anxiety of the future and the virus and everything else. Always we seek to remember ourselves and center ourselves by also remembering our ancestors. So I'm going to play the ancestral drum call and invite you to put your ancestors' names in the chat, and we'll call them after I'm done. Ashe. We have Michael Todd, Ashe. Harold Smith, Ashe. All the other ancestors, named and unnamed, Ashe. So like I said, today is Friday the 13th. Today is National Kindness Day. And this week, the United States surpassed another milestone, hitting over 10.6 million cases of confirmed COVID folks as of this morning. So America obviously is seeing the highest cases of COVID contraction since the outbreak this spring, or the big outbreak when everything shut down. And it's post-election. In fact, we experienced one of the highest rates of COVID contraction on election day. The spreader-in-chief has hosted super spreader events while continually telling his followers, all 72,349,982 of them that voted, and those who didn't vote that still follow him, that it's all good. You know, you might get it, but you'll be cool. Or, you know, as Dave Chappelle said on Saturday Night Live, you know, he's just hypothesizing, you know, cures for the whole world. Maybe light. Can you get light in, you know, crazy stuff, right? And none of it is serving to help the population, even the people who follow him, deal with this virus in a healthy and humane way. An article in The Atlantic from November 2nd this year lists many of the false claims the president has made about the Rona, and his claims range from declarations that the virus would go away without a vaccine. That was on May 8th, 2020. And then multiple claims of, like I said, the random remedies of hydroxychloroquine and high-intensity light. See, Dave Chappelle reads the news too. All the claims have been debunked by medical experts like Dr. Fauci, but Trumpsters don't believe in science. You know, many folks don't believe in science. They believe in this Trumpian anti-logic. This is the logic of I, me. The logic that defiantly declares, I don't know, but here's what I think. A logic that proudly defies all the best practices and everyone's safety. In fact, just in the last week, the CDC released new research that said wearing a mask not only protects other people, which is what we knew back in the spring, but it protects us too, right? So there's a double bottom line to wearing a mask, and yet people still don't want to wear a mask because, you know, science, right? Folks who ascribe to this anti-logic have become convinced that their rights as free citizens of the United States of America precludes them from accepting any responsibility for the fates and plights of their countrymen, right? So when I say, and I've never said this, but when I say I don't want to wear a mask or I don't have to wear a mask, basically I'm saying I don't care about you, right? That's how this is playing out. As an example, remember Costco Karen? The older lady who sat down in the middle of Costco when the manager asked her to wear a mask, and she defiantly declared in Hillsboro, Oregon, that wearing a mask or being asked to wear a mask was a violation of her rights as an American citizen. This is not the only case. I mean, social media is full of them, but this to me was one of the most hilarious. Like, I'm too old to really sit in the middle of a Costco crying about rights and masks. Just wear a mask, get what you need from Costco, go home and take your mask off, right? You would think it's common sense. But folks are really connecting this issue of mask wearing for the common good to a violation of their constitutional rights. An analysis of other incidents in this conversation from an online news outlet called The Conversation back in July found that mask mandates don't actually violate any constitutional rights. But, you know, research is science. So there's 72 million people who won't listen to Fauci. There's, again, 72 million who won't follow the research and understand what the Constitution actually says about our rights and how mask mandates for the common good do not violate, again, constitutional rights. In the same way that folks who watch elections are saying via research, right? This is what they do, that there is no voter fraud. We have experts for a reason, right? But because we have so many claims regarding the infringement on liberty related to mask wearing, and that a lot of those comments come from Trump supporters, revolve around restoring America's greatness and retaining rights and liberties from people who have never had their rights and liberties taken away. They've never been considered chattel. They've never, ever been considered three-fifths of a human being. This begs several questions, actually. But for today's conversation, I want to focus on the question of freedom, right? What is freedom? What does it mean to have freedom? And what does it look like in practice? We have
a comment from Miss Diane Foote. My husband had it, referring to COVID. It's not a joke.
So folks in the audience, thank you, Diane. Glad to have you here. Hope your husband's doing well, but she said in the comments, her husband had it, it's not a joke. We have family members that we're not able to see because they have it, and we've not seen them in months. Thankfully, we've not been in contact with them, but you know, they're younger than us. We're in our 40s, they're in their 20s, right? And they have it, right? My father-in-law had it while in hospice. Like, this thing is real. It's not a joke. It's not fake, right? So it begs so many questions because these folks, most Trump supporters, again, granted, we talked about it last week, 18% of African-American men and 8% of African-American women voted for Trump. If there was the, you know, racial trade that that Chappelle had, we would gladly trade those folks. But, you know, hey, we're stuck with them for right now. So we talked last week about how Trump had a broad coalition of folks who are his supporters, no matter how small. These supporters are at every level of society, and these are the folks who are complaining that any kind of regulation with respect to mask wearing and attempts to stem the tide of COVID is a violation of their constitutional rights, their rights as American citizens. So again, if in America we believe that our founding documents equate to freedom, politically, economically, spiritually, and otherwise, then what is freedom? What does it mean to be free? What does that look like in practice? Well, because I have a laptop and I can use Google, I literally Googled the definition of freedom, which we all can do, but you know, science, right? Both the Webster's Dictionary and the American English Dictionary on Apple have this definition for freedom. Several, but I'm going to highlight three for the purpose of this conversation. Freedom is a noun. Its first definition is the power to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. Act, speak, think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. The second, for our purposes, is the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. And the third is the power of self-determination to attribute to the will. The power of self-determination attributed to the will. The quality of being independent of fate or necessity. Those are all very interesting and in some cases mutually exclusive, right? And I think this kind of shows the divide between folks who care about the common good and will wear a mask and those who do not care about the common good, right? So Trumpsters are quick to point out the first definition. You can't make me wear a mask because I have the right to act, speak, and think without hindrance, right? Or restraint. You cannot restrain me in my choices. I'm not going to wear a mask because I'm free to not wear a mask. Yeah.
Miss Diane again. It's a scary thing. It saddens me that people are taking such drastically different views about a killer disease.
Yeah, Diane, it is absolutely scary. But my hope is that this conversation kind of highlights the why that I think undergirds the reason or the rationale, if we want to attribute or give folks that much credit, the rationale behind why there are such disparate beliefs and understandings and thoughts about the mask issue. I don't want to give 45 all of the credit and say the misinformation that has come from the White House has been the sum total of the reason why folks think this way, right? Absolutely exacerbated the issue and absolutely did not help. But this existed before he came to the White House. So the folks who follow him and are not apt to wearing masks because they think it's an infringement of their rights are pointing to that first definition, right? The definition of freedom as the right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. You know, restraint even from facts, restraint even from science, restraint even from recommended best practices to keep them and their loved ones safe, right? This is not somebody saying, hey, don't do that because I don't want you to do that because it's not good for me. No, this is someone saying, a scientist saying, wear a mask because it will protect you, it will protect your children, it will protect your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, your friends, your neighbors, your community, your country. So my issue is that this definition of freedom has everything to do with me and nothing to do with you. My right, quote unquote, to not wear a mask is not only going to affect me, it's going to affect everyone around me, right? And not taking that into account is the problem, right? They view freedom, these folks who choose not to wear a mask, view freedom, again, as an individual issue without regard for the freedom of others to be healthy, happy, and whole. They seek to assert their freedom even at the expense of the freedom of others. What does it imply in terms of their collective view of nation, community, humanity when their individual notions of freedom disregard the freedoms of others? Right? That individualized notion of freedom has no value in community. So how can we be a United States when we aren't thinking communally? Right? Everybody wants to say socialism, communism, those are bad. And I'm not arguing those as economic systems. What I'm arguing is that a sense of the common good is what nation is built on, right? Conversely, Black America, as an example, views freedom in the second definition, the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved, right? Now, mind you, of the 72 plus million people that supported 45, the vast majority of them are European Americans that have never had their liberty, their humanity, their freedom as it's defined or understood taken away from them. They've never been chattel slaves. They've never been considered, in the very Constitution they are saying gives them the right to not wear masks. They've never, in that same document, been considered less than human. But folks who have, African Americans, don't see it this way because these things disproportionately affect us. Yes, we have a lot of folks that don't wear masks. Don't get me wrong. We're not all out here, yeah, mask up. But the vast majority of us are because we have a different perception of community, a different perception of freedom because our freedoms have never been absolute in this country, right? We continue to fight for freedom even in the case of wrongful death and state-sanctioned murder that continually reinforces historic notions of our less than human status that is embedded, ingrained in the genetic makeup of this country. Is literally in the Constitution, right? Amendments have been put onto that founding document that kind of reverse that status, so to speak, and restore our legal human beingness, right? But you cannot legislate culture. And so we still have to contend with these foundational beliefs. And yet, it does not impede our ability. Look at the election results, where overwhelmingly Black women voted and Black people voted in the urban centers to elect President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, right? So why is it that our completely different historical trajectories have created opposite outlooks? You would think that if your humanity had never been questioned, you would be more humane. And the decision to wear a mask and do things that serve the benefit of the whole is an easier and less divisive decision for you than for those whose humanity had been questioned. But it's actually the opposite. While our fight to assert and occupy the fullness of our humanity has always benefited others, I find it interesting that this dichotomy exists, right? So the question is why? What do they gain, they being Trump supporters, by limping through life, behaving like they're the ones who are 3/5 of a human being, right? Not occupying your full humanity because of some absurd notion that your rights are being violated when we're just asking you to be humane. You know, what is the benefit to those individuals? I don't see one, right? And if this subhuman status has not resulted in substantive benefit to them, then who is it benefiting, right? I mean, this has always been the case. Just look at case record. Brown v. Board, right? The desegregation of schools. These are the same folks, like in Charlottesville, Virginia, who shut down their public school for 5 years because it was more important that their children not go to school than the need to integrate. Who did that hurt? That hurt their kids. The folks who could afford it sent their kids to private schools in other counties, but the majority of people in Charlottesville could not afford private school, and it hurt them. The choice not to integrate hurt them more than it hurt anybody else. The choice not to wear a mask hurts them more than it hurts anybody else. Do you understand? Like, this is just, it's in a lot of ways, it's insanity. And so the question is why? Why continue to make these choices? Why continue to do things that harm the self? Like, they are harming themselves more than they're harming anyone else. And then who does it benefit, right? I'm going to play something and we'll continue that discussion. Oh, we have some ancestors. Ashe.
Ed, Edna, Charles, William, George, Mike, Patricia, Danielle, Mike Bell, and Mike Bell.
All of the bells. Ashe.
Larry Baker Jr.
Larry Baker Jr. Ashe. Ashe. Oh. What's that? So when people use their liberty, their constitutional rights, as an excuse to not do things that serve the common good, who does it benefit? Especially when those choices cause harm to them and their loved ones, right? Whether they recognize it or not. Like, I'm not even going to go the ignorance route. Like, it's something deeper than that. Who ultimately benefits from this type of decision making, and why has a huge part of the country, 25% or so, been socialized to think that this is okay, that this is normal, right? Is this what it means to be free? To make obstinate choices that don't work for you or anybody else just because you can? Does that make sense? It's like an 8-year-old, or in our case, an 11-year-old, who can't get the breakfast she wants, even though there's food to eat, and she stomps around and throws stuff in her own room and tears up stuff in her own room. Like, who does that really benefit? Because I'm not buying her new stuff. She just broke everything because she's pissed about not having Pop-Tarts when she really wanted, when she has cereal available, and because she doesn't want the cereal, she tears something up. Like, that's not smart, right? So if this is not freedom, are these extreme responses, or let me rephrase that, if this is what a lot of people, let's say 72 million folks, think of as freedom, are these extreme responses we see to any such regulation of what is to them considered freedom, like the freedom not to wear a mask, is it a subconscious response to the nagging feeling that they too have never actually been fully free? Could it be that the socialization has been such that they have been programmed, as have African Americans to a large extent, as a result of slavery and everything that happened after that? Have we all been programmed to act outside of our interests? And if that's true, then whose interests do our actions benefit? Because not wearing a mask is not going to help me be healthy. And not wearing a mask makes me a danger to my loved ones. So my choice to wear a mask actually is my saying to the community that I love you and I respect your right to be healthy. And I too want to be healthy, right? So the choice not to wear a mask is basically the choice to be sick, and in some cases die. And in many cases spread that death-causing virus to people you love. So if those choices are not beneficial to the individual, their families, and other loved ones, then who do those choices benefit ultimately? And I'm using the virus as a context, but this obviously happens beyond the virus itself, right? So again, what is freedom? What does it mean to have it? And what does it look like in practice? What if the dictionary is again playing a role in obfuscating the truth of freedom's meaning? Right. If you'll recall, a couple of months ago, or actually toward the beginning of the summer, I think, we had a discussion about the difference between power and authority. And we looked up the definitions of power and authority, and we found those definitions to not be helpful because it conflated, the dictionary definitions conflated power and authority, right? And what we came to an understanding of is that power is innate, and authority is conferred. Right? So I have the power to not wear a mask, but I don't have the authority to demand that others not wear their mask. And vice versa. I have the power to wear my own mask, but I don't have the authority to make other people wear masks. Right? And Dr. Wade Nobles defines power as the ability to define reality for oneself and others in a way that those others act as though that reality is one of their own choosing, right? And so we have folks defining reality for people, and those people are behaving as if that reality is of their own choosing. So when 45 says, Rona is fine, I got it and I'm great, you don't have to wear a mask, he's defining a reality for 72 million people. And those 72 million people are saying, he got it, he's fine, so I'll be fine, which is not often the case. But they are choosing to accept that reality and behave as if it's one that they created for themselves, right? But obviously, with the election, it didn't benefit 45, and it's not benefiting them. So who is it benefiting, right? Every human being is born with power, which means it's innate. But that doesn't mean we have the unilateral authority to dictate the reality of others. Could it be that we've hit another chink in the plutocratic armor, the matrix, the veil, or the smoke screen that was constructed to keep the rest of us fighting amongst ourselves to get out of the proverbial barrel full of crabs, right? Because when you have folks continually arguing about little things like putting a mask on, right? It's not an obtrusive thing. It's not like we're telling people that you have to live in a bubble and you can never ever see anybody again. We understand you have to go to work. We understand you have to get groceries. Put a mask on. It protects you. It protects the people around you. Little thing, right? Ideas of race. Actually, a little insidious kind of thing that has been built out or has festered and grown into this huge thing because we've not been able to overcome this idea of division based on superficial means. Like the way I look compared to the way anybody else looks should not be enough to keep us from recognizing each other's humanity. Right? It shouldn't be enough. And yet, it's a thing that will keep some people like me from getting jobs and being paid at certain rates, and other people not, right? They have the full access. So who does this benefit? Because if I get mad at the people who are benefiting from the privilege of just looking the way they do, when many folks don't understand that privilege, then I'm not really focusing on the real enemy. Right? And if those people get mad that have that privilege because they think people like me are taking away their jobs when I'm obviously not, then they aren't focusing on the real enemy. Again, someone's benefiting from our being at each other's throat. We're the crabs, and someone's created this barrel, right? So the question is, what is freedom? What does it look like, or what does it mean to have it, and what does it look like in practice? Freedom is and freedom ain't. My idea is Ubuntu. I am because you are, and because you are, I am, is what freedom really is, which is antithetical to what the dictionary definition says, right? In the sense that the first definition, the power to act or speak or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint, is individualized and not useful to the whole, right? Even the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved is not really about freedom, because there are stories of folks who never became physically free, but were spiritually and intellectually free. And I'm not saying it made their situation better, but what I'm saying is freedom is more than a physical state of being, right? And even the power of self-determination attributed to the will, the quality of being independent or fate or necessity, is interesting because of how we believe, how we understand notions of fate and necessity. I cannot be independent of my hunger just 'cause, right? I can fast. I have the self-determination and the will to skip a few meals, but if I skip too many meals, I'm going to physically die, right? So can I not be chained to that necessity? If I want to continue to exist, I am chained to it because I have to nourish my body. So you cannot be truly free from the necessity such as nourishment, right? And fate, a lot of people think of fate as destiny or God or divine intervention, right? In my belief system, I cannot be separated from that. So I am not truly free in being separated or trying to separate from the will of the divine. In fact, my freedom comes from aligning with the will based on my belief system. So how does that ability to self-determine outside of these things create freedom? They don't. So that's what I'm saying, at least for me and for this conversation, these dictionary definitions of freedom are not valuable. However, if we begin to recontextualize, reimagine where freedom is in the context of community, I think we can find more value. And that's really what a politics of humanity is. So let's dive into that. Since the first episode of Drumversations, we've sought to establish a very few important concepts, right? One, that which we have most in common is our collective humanity. We are more alike than we are different because we are human beings. That is the foundational principle of all of my work. 2, as human beings, we have access to power that becomes less and less limited the more we grow into our optimal spiritual and intellectual mental capacity afforded us through our connection to our ancestors in the cosmos, right? The reason why I say it's that kind of trinity, mind, body, and spirit, because it's the alignment of those things that allows us to access our full potential, right? The third thing is only by leveraging the power of our collective humanity. That means working together, activating that trust that we have of ourselves and others. Can we return the world to Ma'at, which is an ancient Kemetic concept of divine balance, right? It's the balance between all of humanity, Geb, which is a Kemetic word for Mother Earth, Gaia, however you want to, call it, and the universe. This is what I call the Cosmic Trinity, right? Where humanity is in balance with itself, which means we are in balance with the earth and in balance with the cosmic forces, right? That Trinity is very important. Mind, body, and spirit. Humanity, the planet, the cosmos. If we were in balance, we wouldn't even need this conversation right now. If we were in balance, there would be no Donald Trump. If we were in balance, there'd be no poverty. If we were in balance, nobody would be talking about how much they're going to charge for a vaccine that affects the whole planet. Like, these are things that are absurd to me. They're absurd because I understand and can see, spiritually and otherwise, the benefit of living in this balance and practicing this politics of humanity, right? And I know that it's possible because it existed prior to the rise of Europe, and we're going to get into that. So the humanity's innerverse, right, is where it all comes together for us. This is the secret to our power and our freedom. Theologian Dr. James Cone wrote that the task of a black theology is to kill the gods that do not belong to the black community. That is, to destroy all of the theological notions or conceptions of deity that don't align with our liberation. In the same way, a politics of humanity seeks to destroy all the notions of power that do not align with this cosmic trinity. That means that in practicing, cultivating and practicing this new politics that's human-centered, we do away with these things that gave us Trump, that makes us commodify a vaccine in such a way that people who don't have insurance, people who don't have access to resources may not be able to afford it, right? I heard a new NPR story this morning that, quote unquote, folks in third world countries might not get access to the vaccine when it becomes available until 2023 at the earliest. That's insanity. That's inhumane. And it's only such because we are not thinking in a human-centered way. We are not leveraging our collective power for the good of all of us, right? So these things can change, but in order for them to change, we have to do away with the current ideas and ideals that govern our interactions and our decision-making, right? Taken from this perspective, we must redefine freedom in the same way Dr. Wade Nobles redefined power and Dr. Cone reimagined his notion of God, right? This definition is not new. Rather, it's a return to the notion of freedom that existed before the rise of Europe. Thus, an optimal definition of freedom would relate to Wade Nobles' idea of power, right? Which says that the essence of power is the ability to define someone's reality and make them live accordingly to its definition as though it's the definition that they chose. But we have to balance that, right? Because that can still be used for exploitation. That's what we see in the context of 45. I got COVID, I don't wear a mask, I'm fine. And then you have folks who don't know any better or are choosing not to know any better or believe because they've been socialized and conditioned to believe, right? For whatever reason, his perceived wealth, the fact that he's in the White House, whatever drives them to follow this person, right? They are following the reality he's outlining for them as if it's one of their own choosing. And that's a manifestation of exploitation. So alone, Wade Noble's definition of power can be exploitative. But if we couple that with this new definition of freedom, and I'm not 100% sure these are the right words, but the idea is here, then I think we bring another leg to that cosmic balance, that cosmic trinity, right? So freedom, here's my idea for how freedom can be redefined. Freedom, then, is the ability to leverage our power in service of the community to ensure that every human being has the opportunity to fully realize their potential. That means that in order for me to be free, every choice that I make has to be made in the context of other human beings. That means the onus is on me. I am accountable because I am free to wear a mask, because my freedom is dependent upon the freedom of others. And if we all wear masks, then we control the spread of the virus. It goes down and our economy continues to go. We can continue to do school. We can continue to do all the things people are complaining about not being able to do, who also, incidentally, are not wearing masks and paving the way for us to do these things, right? You see how that shifts the onus of freedom from the individual to the community, but individual decisions benefit the community? That's what a politics of humanity is. Right? Of course, I can choose right now, if I want to stop talking to you and go play a video game. That's my choice. Right? But me playing a video game does not negatively impact anyone. My walking out of this house, without a mask on has the potential to impact everyone I come into contact with. That's the difference. Does that make sense? Like power, freedom exploited for individual gain is destructive, but it can be catalytic when used in the service of the common good. Steve Biko said, "The greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. No one can truly be free until we destroy the false notions of freedom and power that have been used to keep us bound and powerless." Right? These inhumane ideals impede the practice of a politics of humanity because they keep us from realizing our full potential as human beings. Right? When we continue to reify and reinforce these anti-human notions of freedom and power, we actually give our power away. We actually become less free. It seems counterintuitive, but when the world is upside down, counterintuitive actually is right. Because we have been socialized in America and the West in general, but in America to a larger extent, that material wealth is the value of a person and not the person themselves. That's upside down thinking. That's anti-human thinking, right? We have been socialized that the individual is as important or more important than the whole. That actually also is anti-human and upside down thinking. To consider ourselves human because there are other human beings, which is, I think, a Zimbabwean proverb, is how things should be. Which means, yes, I exist individually, but I cannot be me without you. Ubuntu, I am because you are, and because you are, I am. That's where our freedom lies, in each other. The proof is in the history of Africa, Al-Kibilon. How could we have created notions of God, math, science, art, music, agriculture, architecture, and the ability to navigate the sea and the stars, advanced medical practices, and other such phenomena if we had not realized our full human potential? In a modern context, what could America be if we invested more resources in people than in war? If we invested more resources in education than in the cultivation of personal wealth? I think last week I used the example that the plutocracy, the plutocratic class, has made $637 billion since the rise of COVID. And very little, if any of that, has been reinvested in into science and research, into ensuring that young people who don't have access to the internet and computers have the resources they need to learn virtually. Very little of that have been reinvested in people. In fact, Jeff Bezos, and I say this knowing that I just ordered something from Amazon yesterday, right? I mean, it is what it is. But he asks us, people who buy from Amazon, to support an emergency response fund for employees who are being underpaid, when he himself has made about $60 billion since March. If he just spread that wealth amongst his employees, his frontline employees, he wouldn't need our help. Like, the audacity to ask that question when the majority of people on the planet will never see $1 million, let alone $60 billion for someone who already is worth about $140 billion. That's inhumane. That's what I mean by extraction and exploitation, right? The practice of a politics of humanity flips that. It doesn't negate the ability to earn wealth, but what it does is it contextualizes that wealth in the context of the wider community. I earned $60 billion during a global pandemic. How can I use my excessive wealth to ensure that people who don't have access to the resources that I have are healthy, happy, and whole? That becomes my responsibility. And not because I did something inhumane to amass that wealth, as we saw the robber barons of the 19th century, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Vanderbilts, and all those folks. They contributed to libraries, that's Carnegie, they did all this stuff, but it's because they knew they were kind of screwing people over too, right? No, I'm saying because we shift the culture, we began to do things and make investments in each other because it's the right thing to do for the right reason, period. That's a politics of humanity, leveraging our individual and collective power for the good of the whole, right? I'm going to play something and then we're going to wrap this up. All right. Freedom ain't free. It's just not. To be free does not mean that you have no accountability and that you have no responsibility for anyone else but yourself. That is not what it is. That is not a useful definition or understanding of freedom. So here's what I think it means to be free. We already talked about that, Ubuntu. Here's what I think it looks like in practice and why it's important to have it. Freedom manifests as a state of our consciousness, right? It's a state of mind and reflection of our consciousness. It rests delicately in the middle of exploited self-interest and altruistic communal existence, right? It's a wedge. It's a decision, it's an action, it's a verb. It's something that we do. Because if we don't do it the right way, we start exploiting people, right? If we do it the right way, then we have the community at heart all the time. My freedom to build wealth can happen in a way that benefits the community or as a complete extraction of resources.
Two things. First, Jim Maneri said, "Hi, I just played piano with you there."
Ha!
Deep for a minute.
Hi, Jim.
And then Gary Cox, an understanding and realization of your disconnected spirit has to occur first. Next would be the work to reconnect. Excellent talk. Thank you.
Ashe. Thanks, Uncle Gary. That's absolutely right. And that's why we talk about in the 3 pillars of the politics of humanity, the ritual of connection to yourself, to the ancestors, and to the cosmos, the ritual of preparation, that's the educational component, and the ritual of action, right? That's summed up beautifully in what you said. Thank you. So freedom, in my mind, is our living out of Sankofa, understanding the past to give context to the present and creating a better future, and Ubuntu. I am because you are, and because you are, I am, right? Bondage, however, is our current reality. If I believe in any way that my freedom has nothing to do with you, then I am not free because I can't be free if you're not free, right? That's across the board. I just can't. It's not humane to understand the world that way, right? Our great ancestor, Martin Luther King, said, as long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free, right? That's why it's a state of mind. It's a manifestation of our consciousness. Freedom is not a wholly individual phenomenon. That's what we've been driving home. I cannot be truly free if you are not free, right? That's why the definition, as I see it at least, is a fundamentally communal. Right? It is true that an individual could exploit their power, reiterating, in ways that give a semblance of freedom, right? We have this phrase, independently wealthy, right? Jeff Bezos, to pick on Jeff. Again, we see him as independently wealthy, right? Because he could stop working a day and live the rest of his life. His grandkids will be able to live. His great-grandkids will be able to live and never have to work. And people think that's free, right? But my favorite slave owner, Thomas Jefferson, on reflecting about how the country will be judged spiritually, as a result of slavery, said, indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever, that considering numbers, nature and natural means only, a revolution of the wheel of fortune and exchange of situation is among possible events, that it may become probable by supernatural interference. What he was saying is that he recognized that there were more slaves on his property than there were him. And if at any moment those enslaved human beings recognized themselves that they were in the majority, they could easily overtake him. He lived in fear, but he was independently wealthy. Why do wealthy people have gated communities? What are they afraid of? You see what I'm saying? Freedom is not about wealth. Freedom is not even about not having to go to work. It's a state of mind. It's a state of consciousness. It's a state of being. It's what we do with and for each other. It's not about whether or not I have to wear a mask. I don't have to wear a mask. But because I'm free, I choose to consider you and your freedom. Therefore, I wear a mask. Completely different than I think, therefore I am. And I think I ain't wearing a mask, therefore I am not wearing a mask, right? It doesn't work for the whole, for the community, right? This dude, independently wealthy, afraid that if his enslaved Africans turn on him, he's doomed, is a representation, one, of current plutocratic thinking. But more importantly, it shows how shallow Eurocentric values are, because notions of righteousness and justice are not about revenge. If they were, maybe he would have been right. But upon, emancipation, yes, there were rebellions. People fought for their freedom. I'm not saying that there was not turmoil and that everything during slavery was peaceful, as it should not have been, right? It's well within our human rights to fight for what is just and righteous. But there are no widespread reports that upon emancipation, all the formerly now enslaved folks turned on their former masters and just massacred them, right? That didn't happen in a way that many people, even today, are afraid that it will happen. That's why police kill black folks. They see them and they don't see them. They see them as monsters. They don't see them as human beings, right? In the Philando Castile video, you see the officer shaking. This dude's in the car with his daughter. The officer is shaking. What's he afraid of, right? Consciousness or lack thereof, right? Because of this constant fear, because of this constant fear, even the most wealthy class are not free. They are bound by their fear, right? This is an example of how overly simplistic notions of freedom are. So, a politics of humanity embraces the fullness of our collective humanity to focus our power to manifest that which is best for all without neglecting any specific needs, right? Fear suggests, not just fear, but this idea of a mask being an infringement upon rights means that I have very few rights and I'm not going to let you take away what I think are my rights. That's fear, right? If we practice a politics of humanity, we embrace folks and we can let that fear go. Because while everybody has needs, everybody has different needs, but we are leveraging our collective power to ensure that all the needs are met. That's the problem. We cannot shelter in place while our medical experts get a handle on this crisis because we have not socialized the populace, not just to trust government and experts, but to do what's right by the populace, right? That's a failure of the collective whole, the nation. If we were to cultivate, when we cultivate and practice a politics of humanity, that will not be the case because we will be charged from the outset to take care of each other, right? I'm really making an argument for the return to an original way of being, the original consciousness that is an African-centered collective consciousness. It was not perfect. Perfection is our responsibility in the moment that we find ourselves, but it is an ideal, right? We understand why Eurocentric values shrunk to an individualized frame. Europe, as an example, doesn't have the level of diversity of resources that Africa has. And so there's a deficit both in resources and the mentality that came from that. But resources notwithstanding, freedom is a reflection of consciousness. Let's be about the work of holding each other accountable for learning together, growing together, and elevating our consciousness to connect to our fullest humanity so we all can truly be free. Have a good weekend. I'm going to play you out.